Do you have an idea for a project or craft that requires lightweight and durable building material? You've got an idea for a cool Halloween or a cosplay costume or prop and need to build some custom parts? How about a puppet, a treasure box, or any sort of prop for work or play? Paper mache, paper clay, and even cardboard mache may be just the building mediums you need. This method makes very durable and long-lasting structures. Hey guys, and welcome to another video. First, let's gather up some newspaper and other materials. The newspaper should be bland and cheap, mostly the black and white stuff you can find for free at supermarkets. Some colored print is okay, as long as the paper is not too shiny. Avoid the glossy stuff like you see in mail or magazine pages. We will also need brown paper bags. You can collect and save these from grocery and other stores. Different colored bags will work, although I like to stick to brown so I can keep track of what layer I'm on. Oh snap, remember the Grimace shakes? Hey guys, I got the McDonald's Grimace shake. Gonna give it a try. Happy birthday, Grimace. Kinda tastes like yuck, all over my Rick and Morty shirt. Anywho, do not cut your paper strips with scissors or other paper cutters. Hand ripping exposes the paper fibers and helps them bond together better on your project. All strips should be ripped by hand only. I find this easier with a ruler or straight edge on a solid surface. Here I'm using a large paint stirring stick from Home Depot, but a ruler, a book, or any straight edge will do. Find out how many sheets you can tear at the same time to speed up the process. I usually use 2 to 3 full sheets at a time. Now we separate the strips so that we can tear them in half. This doesn't have to be perfect. Save all of the irregular pieces too. The extra pieces always get torn off to fit somewhere. Line them up and tear them in half again, and then line them up and tear them in half again. Separate some of the stack down and tear some strips into smaller pieces for more detailed work in different areas. Save all scraps for later tearing. To stay organized, I like to keep the prepped paper in a clear strip bin container for easy access. This way I can see what paper I have and how much. It helps to separate the pieces as you drop them in the bin for easy retrieval later. For the brown paper bags, we need to tear apart the bottom where it was folded and glued shut. Try your best to separate the pieces by peeling them apart, but if you finally give up and have to rip some to separate them, it's fine. We just need to open it into a paper tube. Once you have the bag open at the bottom, follow the folds from the body of the bag and fold it down flat. Fold the bag over on itself and press it down. Now we can tear this into strips. Tear them just like you would tear the newspaper, either purely by hand or with the help of a straight edge. I highly recommend picking up a few paint stirrers. As you'll see, they are pretty useful. Do the whole bag this way, saving any scrap pieces left from the deconstruction of the bottom of the bag. Open these strips and look for where the paper was joined and separate them. Give it a yank, a tear, whatever it takes. Fold this in half and find the middle and continue like we did with the newspaper. First tearing in half and stacking, and tearing in half, and stacking and tearing in half. If you're using fast food bags, obviously they can be greasy. Watch out for greasy parts of the paper and remove any that you find. I also keep the brown paper in another bin. Separate the pieces as you fill the bins and store for later. Most craft stores will also have multiple sized rolls of brown bag paper on their shelves if you are low on paper bags or have limited access. Unroll a length of sheet and tear it off. The first tear is notoriously stubborn to rip, just make it happen, Cap'n. Now that we finally have a sheet that we can work with, fold this onto itself and press it down. We are going to tear this one in the middle so we can double them up and cut our work in half. Open the pieces and stack them together, then fold them closed. Now continue to tear into strips and process down for the strip bin. There is no way to know how many strips you will need to finish your whole project, but for now, prep a few sheets of each to start and resupply as needed. Let's cook up some paste. Get 1 cup of water, pour it into a pot and bring it to a boil. While we're waiting, grab some all-purpose flour. Grab a mixing bowl and 1/3 cup of cold water. We're going to add to this 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Grab yourself a whisk, mix it all up, make sure there are no lumps. We are going to bring that to our boiling water. Slowly whisk in the flour-water mix. You will see this start to thicken almost immediately. If you overcook this, it will be very thick and difficult to work with, although it will still function properly. I did actually overcook this one while I was filming, and you'll see in this batch that it is pretty lumpy. It does still work though. So once it comes back to a boil, give it a couple more quick whips, remove it from the heat, and let it cool down. When the paste is cool enough to touch, transfer it to a container with a lid. This can be stored in the refrigerator for 3 days before it starts to get sour and possibly start molding. To prevent mold, you can mix in a capful of bleach. This will help keep your paste fresh for up to 3 weeks in the refrigerator. A kid-friendly version of this would be to use a few drops of clove oil instead of bleach, although I have not tried this method myself. Mix the bleach all the way in. Now this paste is ready for paper mache, paper clay, and even cardboard mache. If the batch becomes watery after a day or 2 of use, stir it up with your fingers each time you use it, and make new batches as necessary. As you can see, this is a particularly lumpy batch, but it will work just fine. We'll see a much better batch later in the video. And like I said, make new batches as necessary. You'll get the hang of it. Let's build an armature. The armature is the framework that we'll be covering in paper strips. Sometimes pieces are added as you go along, or even built in parts that are joined along the way. Balloons and lightweight cardboard are the most common go-to, but you can get creative with all kinds of objects and tape. This is also where cardboard mache really comes in handy. Corrugated and flat stock cardboard like cereal and beer boxes can be cut into strips and shapes and pasted together to form the shape of our armature. This is the best way to make fake arms and legs. I cut this beer box into 1-inch strips. I'm going to paste these together and stagger them. As you can see, this extra lumpy paste is a little difficult to work with, but it will still function. Once these are pasted together, you'll need to press them or clamp them in place to let them dry. But prior to doing that, make sure that you wipe down the outside surfaces so that they don't stick to anything else. In order to press these down, this is where having extra paint stirrers accessible is very handy. These smaller paint stirrers are 1 inch wide, and because the cardboard are 1-inch strips, you can use them to help line them up and keep them in line. It's also handy to have quite a few smaller plastic clamps on hand that you can use to hold these together, or you can hold other pieces together. Clamp them in place, and this glue actually dries in about 10-15 minutes. Leave it to dry, and we'll come back to it and add other pieces on. Continue this method as much as necessary to get to your desired length. It really comes down to what you want to make, then how to fashion a basic shell of that object. You can add or cut away pieces as necessary to work out the finished shape. Sometimes it helps to have a picture or drawing of your object for reference, like a picture of a minion or a human skull, or even just notes with measurements and sketches. Here I'm going to be making a fake leg, so I took a couple of measurements of my own leg, made them just a little bit smaller, and start fashioning them where I would like them to be. Continue to add pieces to build out your shape. I usually use masking tape to hold the pieces together while I paste the first layer of paper in place. Tape will peel off the longer it sits, and balloons will start to lose their air within a day or two most of the time. This is why I get a good first layer of paper pasted on before a balloon starts to shrink or other pieces start to fall off overnight because the tape didn't hold. Time is a factor in paper mache, as it will take time between layers to dry, sometimes even days. Keep this in mind, as time will affect the grip of the tape on the unfinished armature. I'm also going to make a quick little phone holder and acoustic speaker. I will quickly cut out a top and bottom with sides and pop out a little hole for the phone speaker to play through. I'm also going to need to make a harness to hold the phone up. Make sure everything fits and lines up properly. I'm going to put on just enough tape to make sure that everything stays where it is supposed to be, so that I can then start layering it with paper and paste. Keep in mind, as you're building your project, it's going to grow in size very slightly, but about one sheet of paper at a time. So when it comes to wrapping the phone, make sure that this harness is just a little bit larger than what it needs to be. Balloons are one of the most common materials used for armatures because you can very easily make a globe, a pumpkin, or a puppet head. Very easy to just fill up a balloon and tape the knot down, and you have yourself a circle. It's also very easy to make puppet heads by attaching one of these to a toilet paper roll. Put the knot through the tube, grab yourself a couple of pieces of tape, and secure the balloon firmly to the tube. Your puppet head armature is complete. Let's start with the puppet head. It helps to have small, thin strips to attach the head to the neck, so prep and tear some appropriate sized paper. Grab one and dab it in the paste. I draw the paper on the edge of the container to remove the excess paste and then flip it around to get the whole side of the strip covered. Apply it to the project while pushing out any air or wrinkles. Smooth down the surface after each new piece to help even out the paste and remove air or loose pieces. Repeat with additional strips, overlapping and crisscrossing. Always be on the lookout for bumps or pieces that are sticking up. Just keep rubbing any extra paste all around your whole project, especially existing strips of paper. It helps bond all of the fibers together. Continue until you've pretty much covered anything that has tape. This balloon will hold air for a few days, so I usually let this dry up for a few hours just on this little neck part before I'll finish the whole thing off in 1 or 2 sessions. The whole head will end up being covered before 2-day period before the balloon starts to deflate. I used the same approach on the leg. The idea is to get any areas where tape is holding something together covered before the tape starts to slip. Continue adding sheets of paper, building up your first base layer of the white newspaper print. Often during the construction process of this base layer, we'll need to add parts and pieces to fill out our base shape. Cut out the pieces you need and tape it in place. Cover any tape with paper strips and paste. Again, I like to attach something new and let it dry before I continue. The paper or cardboard can be bent or cut while it is dry. It can also be shaped to our benefit while it is wet. Sometimes it is necessary to wet it down with the paste in order to reshape it. Continue this process until you have added and covered everything thoroughly with the first base layer of newsprint. Once this is dry, we can start the layer of brown paper bag strips. Repeat overlapping strips until you have covered the entire project in brown paper. Finally, we can start our last layer. This third layer is a final cover of newspaper strips. Once the third layer is dry, the project is lightweight, strong, and durable. This can now be painted or used unfinished as it is. Likewise, we can make alterations like cutaways or additions to the armature and build in details with paper clay. The paper clay is made with 1 roll of very cheap toilet paper. Look for septic safe on the packaging. This stuff falls apart when it gets wet. Fill a large pot halfway with water, then start to dispense the roll into the pot of water. Tear strips off occasionally and reach in and break up the paper as it is submerged in the water. It should break up pretty easily. Once the whole roll is in the water, continue to break up as much as possible. Set this pot on a stove and bring it to a boil. Once it's boiling, turn the heat to medium and let it simmer for an hour, stirring occasionally. At that point, take it off the stove and let it cool. Grab a blender, and we are going to puree the toilet paper in small batches. Add water as needed and really whip it good. Pour the batches into a strainer and continue until you have processed all the paper. Now squeeze out as much water as possible, then break up into pieces into a dry pot or a mixing container. This clay requires glue all. Other white glues will not do. It must be a glue all white glue. Into the paper pulp, we are going to add 2 spoonfuls of the flour paste. Pour in about 2 or 3 tablespoons of the glue all. I also add a capful of bleach or clove oil to keep the clay from spoiling or molding. This next part is not necessary, but I always add about a capful of boiled linseed oil, as it helps speed up the drying process. You can skip this one, but I've always used it. Now start to mix it up with a spoon, and then get in there and mash the whole thing well with your hands. Really get in here and mix everything in evenly. Put your clay in a container with a lid. I like to put a film of plastic wrap over the top to keep it fresh. This can now be used and then stored in the refrigerator for weeks. To apply the clay, pull out little clumps and spread onto your project. We will need to build up layers less than 1/4 inch at a time and let the clay dry between applications. Here I will start the bridge of a nose, press it down and make sure the edges are smoothed onto all of the surfaces. I'll lay down some clay for the eye sockets. This clay will shrink very slightly as it dries. It's best to keep the application small and gradually add to your project as you go along. I'll put in some clay for the chin. Use any sort of objects to shape and smooth the surface of the clay and then leave it to dry. Drying can take anywhere from 6 to 10 hours, but can still be worked as it dries. Continue to add and shape the clay. It is pretty easy to smooth down the surface with a spoon, a butter knife, or all sorts of other objects. Likewise, to get a smooth surface, rub some of the flour paste into the surface of the clay while it is still drying. This also helps from the clay sticking to your fingers or tools if you are working on it while it is drying. Once the clay is completely dry, it is hard as wood, and if desired, can be sanded with sandpaper to get a very smooth surface. Likewise, this can be treated as if it was wood and painted or stained depending on your final project's needs. You now have the technology to make paper mache and paper clay. It is completely up to you as to what projects you would like to create. All the materials I used are listed below with my Amazon affiliate links. Leave me a comment about your experience with paper mache projects and what you would like to make. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Now go out there and start creating.